Good afternoon, honored guests, members of the audience, and everyone in attendance today. Welcome to the PBIC Research Symposium 2021. My name is Kevin Tunchad, and I'm a faculty member here at the Priti Phnom International College. Exactly a year ago here in Thailand, the government imposed a nationwide curfew as part of its measure to curb the spread of the COVID-19 virus. Around the same time, elsewhere in Italy, Spain, France, and the United Kingdom, a lockdown was implemented for the same purpose of managing a public health crisis as a result of the COVID virus. In recognizing the impact that the global pandemic has had on countries, economies, and lives around the world, the topic of today's event, Thailand's 1 year after COVID-19, will feature 6 researchers who will be sharing their findings with us on how the pandemic has affected different aspects of our lives here in Thailand and abroad. For members of the public interested in attending this symposium from outside of campus, please note that we are being broadcasted live on the PBIC Thammasat page on Facebook. We're also being joined on Zoom by our partner university at the Aoyama Gakuin University in Tokyo, Japan. For members of the audience who are also using the translation device, please note that you can turn to channel A for English and channel 4 for Thai. So to formally begin, I'd like to first invite Assistant Professor Akarapong Kamkun, the Dean of the Priti Phnom International College, to give us a report on today's event.
Associate Professor Dr. Kesini Tunchat, Rector of Thammasat University, Dr. Promindra Suridet, former Deputy Prime Minister of Thailand, Vice Rectors, distinguished guests, media, faculty members, our friends from Aoyama Gakuin University and Taiwan. Good afternoon. It is my great pleasure to welcome all of you to Priti Phnom International College, Thammasat University, and in particular, the PBIC Research Symposium on Thailand's 1 year after COVID-19. At the onset, I would like to express my sincere congratulations to Associate Professor Kesini Tunchat on your appointment as the Rector of Thammasat University for the 2nd term. Priti Phnom International College was established in 2008 in support of Thammasat University's vision of becoming an academic platform in international education in interdisciplinary studies with the concept of borderless education. PBIC provides bachelor degree program in 3 different area studies, namely Chinese studies, Indian studies, and Thai studies, taught by international and experienced lecturers specialized in different fields, such as international politics, linguistics, economics, law, engineering, and sociology. At this month marks the 1 year since Thailand's first confirmed COVID-19 case in January in 2020, and the subsequent outbreak in March. The main objective of this symposium is to review and provide an insights on the impact of COVID-19 and the lessons learned from our researchers who will present different perspectives from case of China, India, and Thailand. I hope today's PBIC Research Symposium on Thailand's 1 year after COVID-19 will become educational and constructive to the people of all sectors, including researchers, and together we can help to find a sustainable and meaningful solution in coping with this new normal. This event also initiate an international academic cooperation between the college and our partner around the world. I have to thank our friends from Aoyama Gakuin University, Japan, for joining us in this event, and I hope that you will continue all kinds of support to Thammasat University and PBIC. Last but not least, I would like to take this opportunity to express my sincere thanks to our distinguished panelists, media, and in particular, Dr. Promin Lersuridej, former Deputy Prime Minister of Thailand. You honor us with your presence, and we look forward to hearing from you valuable insights. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that, Dr. Karapong. Can I also ask that you please present a bouquet to Associate Professor Kesini Vitunchat as a token of our congratulations for her on having been appointed Director of Thammasat for the second term. Madam Rector, I'd also like to ask that you please take this opportunity to officially open the symposium.
Your Excellency, Dr. Pumin Lersuridej, former Deputy Prime Minister, Dean Akharapong Kamkhoon, Pridi Phnom Yong International College, Vice Rector, distinguished guests, good afternoon. I'm very pleased to welcome all of you to Pridi Phnom Yong International College. Thammasat University has a mission to be the world-class university for the people, with the objective to groom students with global mindset for the future workforce. We offer diverse international programs across disciplines at all levels. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm also honored to welcome you to the PBIC Research Symposium on Thailand 1 year after COVID-19, where distinguished panelists will share with us the invaluable lessons learned from cases in China, India, and also Thailand. Since the beginning of last year, the pandemic has spread rapidly around the world, affecting the life of more than 100 million people. It is therefore crucial for us to join hands to alleviate the adverse impact of COVID-19. This symposium would not be possible without the efforts of Pridi Phnom Yong International College and active participants from all of you. I wish the symposium today a great success. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Rector. Our symposium today will also have the honor of welcoming our keynote speaker, Dr. Promin Lersuridej, who in his capacity as a former government minister had played a role in formulating some of Thailand's major policies, including the universal healthcare coverage. Today, we'll be hearing from him on his views, ideas, and suggestions on the COVID crisis. And as such, I'd like to ask the Dean Assistant Professor Akarapong to come to the floor once again to present Dr. Promin with a souvenir. To commemorate the event, may I also ask the Rector and Professor Chanwit Gasetsiri, the Chair Professor of Pridi Phnom Yong International College, to please join us for a group photo. Moderating our panel today will be Dr. Montini Tira Mangkalanon, the Deputy Dean for Research and International Affairs from the PBIC. Ajahn Montini received her doctorate from the University of Beijing, specializing in the field of economics, and became a member of the PBIC in 2018. She has published on a range of topics, including foreign direct investment and e-commerce. Ajahn Montini, if you could please.
Your Excellency, Dr. Promin Lersurade, respected Vice Dean, faculty members, students, media, and distinguished guests, good afternoon. I'm Dr. Montini Tira Mangkalanon, Vice Dean for Research and International Affairs, moderating for today's event. And it's my pleasure to welcome you all to PBIC Research Symposium, Thailand 1 year after COVID-19. Before we begin, I would like to introduce our presenter to come out on stage one by one. Our first presenter, Assistant Professor Dr. Lin Yi, Lecturer of Chinese Studies Program. He is the first foreign lecturer of Thammasat University with the academic title of Assistant Professor. And his field of interest is Chinese culture and society, social science research method, and international students mobility. And today he will be presenting on the title of Others or Brothers, Attitudes of Thai under the threat of COVID-19 towards Chinese tourists in the lens of contact and exchange. Please welcome. Our second presenter, Dr. Thomas Bruce, Head of Thai Studies Program. Dr. Thomas Bruce, the field of expertise is in history of Thailand, Southeast Asia, Asian and global history, economic and business history. And today his presentation title is Lunch in Off Lockdown, the impact of COVID-19 on Bangkok restaurant, trade, management, and culture. Please welcome. Our third presenter, Dr. Shweta Sinha. She also is the second foreign lecturer of Thammasat University that has the academic title of Assistant Professor. And her field of expertise is in agriculture risk management, disaster management, environmental and sustainability, science and technology applications. And today her presentation title is The Impact of COVID-19 on Agriculture of Thailand and India. Our fourth presenter, Dr. Mohammad Farhim, the head of Indian Studies Program. His field of expertise is in regional geography, geoeconomics, India-ASEAN relations, tourism geography, economic and urban geography, and India diaspora. And today his presentation title is The COVID-19 Impact on Internal Migrants in India, Regional Perspective and Response. Please welcome. Our fifth presenter, Dr. Usani Ratnananon, Head of Chinese Studies Program. Her field of expertise is in Chinese grammar, translation from Thai, English, and Chinese, and also China public diplomacy and soft power. Her presentation title is China Live Streaming Industry Amidst COVID-19 Crisis. Yes, please welcome. Our last presenter, Dr. Ontisha Dongratana, Lecturer of Thai Studies Program. Her field of expertise is in Thai politics, international relations, and foreign policy analysis. And today, her presentation title is COVID-19 and the US-China rivalry, preliminary observation in the cases of Vietnam and the Philippines. Yes. Okay, so since the outbreak of COVID-19, we can see that many countries have imposed lockdown to control the spread of pandemic. And as a result, different sectors of the economy are being affected. Hence, finding the right balance between opening up the economy and imposing strict measures to contain the pandemic is a key question for many countries. So today we'll be listening from different perspectives from the case of China, India, and Thailand. Let's begin with Thailand. Thailand is one of the most popular tourist destinations in the world, and Thailand has also suffered a major growth to its tourism industry during the COVID-19 pandemic. So our first presenter, Assistant Professor Dr. Lin Yi, he will be looking at the tourist sector of Thailand, exploring what underlies the attitude of Thai towards Chinese tourists in the lens of exchange and contact.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lin Yi. I'm from Chinese Study Program of PBIC. So today is my pleasure to present the research findings from my paper titled Others or Brothers, Attitudes of Thais under threat of COVID-19 virus towards Chinese tourists in the lens of exchange and contact. It's a very long title, but I will have four parts in my report. So first, I will explain the rationale of this study. Then I will introduce my research method, which is followed by reporting my findings. And lastly, there are some suggestions for tourism practitioners and policy makers based on findings in this paper. So before the COVID-19, for 5 consecutive years, Chinese tourists account for around 1/4 of all international tourists. Actually, it's like 26% and 27%. In year 2019, there are more than 10 million, or actually 11 million Chinese tourists visited Thailand. Okay. So if we add up the Chinese tourists in recent years, so there are millions of Chinese tourists in Thailand. So this will obviously have a great impact on Thai economy, on Thai society, on ordinary people's lives, and also it can burden the natural environment of Thailand. So the question is, now that almost every Thai people have some level of contact with Chinese tourists, some of them may only have the eye contact, they only gaze at Chinese tourists, but some have more intensive contact with Chinese tourists. So the question is, what do the Thai people see Chinese tourists? What do Thais think of Chinese tourists? As a Chinese myself, this has long been a concern for me because in the past several years, there are quite some negative news about the Chinese tourists on the TV. So we actually did a survey several years ago in year 2016. And we found that there are around 50% of Thais who welcome more Chinese tourists to come to Thailand. But there are still around 40% of people who have some level of reservations or doubts about the coming of too many Chinese tourists. Okay. So as we know that from last year, March 11th, the World Health Organization declared the spreading of COVID-19 to be a pandemic. And since then, a year has passed without many international tourists being found in Thailand. So this actually is very painful for some people, especially those in the tourism industry. But it also provides an opportunity for ordinary Thais to think about tourism, to think about international tourists, especially the Chinese tourists. It's like a separation period or cool off period. It can actually be a good thing for the couple to cool down, to think about their relationships. So it can be healthy in some way. So here is a video released last month from Tourism Authority of Thailand, just last month. So I'd like to play it for just 1 minute.
Hello there. We miss you so much. It's been a while. How are you? You know, Thailand has something to tell you. The scenery here is so much more amazing. I look forward to welcoming you back, waiting for your tight hugs, your pondering moments, your attention, your quality time well spent here in our country. People too await your return. Auntie Thai, the walk master, Nat, the barista, Uncle Pong, so much more amazing. I look forward to welcoming you back, waiting for your tight hugs, your pondering moments, your attention, your quality time well spent here in our country. People too await your return. Auntie Thai, the walk master, Nat, the barista, Uncle Pong, the potter. They all miss you. Lastly,
I hear that they say they all miss you, but I have a question, which is, do they miss Chinese tourists? Do they equally miss Chinese tourists? Okay, so if the answer is yes, what do they miss the Chinese tourists for? Is it because of their Chinese money, Chinese yuan, or they don't like Chinese tourists? They don't want Chinese tourists to come back because of their rude behaviors, or because they bring in the virus, or there are some other attitude formation change factors. So finding these reasons can help reimagine and reconfigure the post-pandemic Thai tourism, as well as improving Thai and China people's relationship. So we seek answer through examining the nature and the intensity of Thai's interactions with Chinese tourists. So this is our research method. So we interviewed 16 participants, which are in different regions of Thailand. And there are 3 types of participants. The first are those who only have eye contact with Chinese tourists. The second type are those only have brief contact with Chinese tourists. And the last type are those who have been providing continuous service to Chinese tourists. And these are our findings. So the participants acknowledge the economic importance of Chinese tourists, no matter they directly make money from Chinese tourists or not. They know that it's very important for their fellow countrymen. Second, the participants don't blame Chinese tourists for bringing in the virus, at least from these participants. And also, we found that the economic costs or benefits are not the main reason that the participants love or hate Chinese tourists. And if we take a closer look, we find that for those without direct or close contact with Chinese tourists, they actually think that the Chinese tourists are the others, or the people who are different from our Thai people. They are others. For those who have brief contact with Chinese tourists, they find that Chinese tourists, although they are not as friendly or generous as Western tourists, they are also not that bad. And lastly, for those who stay with Chinese tourists for some days, they find that the Chinese tourists are actually very friendly, and they also respect Thai culture very much. So it's like Thai people rediscover their long lost brothers. Although this can take time, take some days. So in my paper, we found that the social cultural compatibility and the resonance between the two peoples aroused in sustained interactions are the key for positive attitude change. Here's an example. Although the Chinese tourists did ruin the toilet in the White Temple in Chiang Mai, but they also earnestly worship in the temple, and they don't use Buddha statue to decorate their toilets. So, and lastly, there are some suggestions. Rather than superficially experiencing Asian or Thai culture and lifestyle, which may suit first-time Western tourists, for Chinese tourists, excursions targeted at Chinese tourists should be more culturally thematic. For instance, practicing Buddhism, meditations for days. This can be more suitable for Chinese tourists. And there should also be more opportunities for Chinese tourists to have intensive social cultural exchanges with local Thais. We suggest more policy support for the less institutionalized tourism, especially for those family-run guest houses where hold many or more opportunities for hosts and tourists to have sustained social cultural exchanges. Okay, that's my video. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lee, for such an insightful presentation on the topic of Thai attitude towards Chinese tourists during the impact COVID-19. And we also found that actually it depends on the interaction between the Chinese people and the Thai people. So now let's move to our next presenter, Dr. Thomas Bruce. He will be looking at the restaurant industry of Thailand, examine the impact of COVID-19 in linking the economy, society, and culture, in particular through restaurant in Yaowarat or Chinatown. Please.
Good afternoon, distinguished guest, former minister, dean, vice deans. My paper examines the impact of COVID-19 on the restaurant industry in Thailand. Obviously, share screen. Can you all see the slides? Full screen. There's no full screen. why the restaurant industry, the sector represents one of the world's most thriving and dynamic dining out cultures and repertoires of cuisine. It's closely connected to the tourist industry. You also have a very strong local dining out culture. So Thais tend to dine out 56 times a month. So this is not a marginal peripheral industry in terms of both size and cultural import. This is a major industry and focus of Thai economic activity. So the restrictions associated with the control of COVID-19 were particularly consequential for the restaurant industry. So the size of the market, around about 400 billion baht for the size of the food and beverage market, of which 44 billion is restaurants, and noodle shops, 32 billion baht. This is before the COVID crisis. We also have here a graph representing the growth in the number of restaurant sales. So from 2016 to 2019, you can see this increase, which was a reflection of the general economic growth that Thailand was experiencing at that time before COVID hit. And you have the newly opened restaurants as well. So the economic growth encouraged the opening of new restaurants during this period. Between 2016 2017, you have 12% rise, 25% rise between 2017 and 18, and 97% rise between 2018 and 2019, just before COVID hits. So you have a very rapidly growing sector, thriving dynamic. So what happened to restaurants during COVID and after, just after the lockdown? Well, not all restaurants suffered uniformly. And this interested me. Why? Some actually thrived after lockdown eventually. And I wanted to work out what the reasons for that. So there were 7 contributing factors: government policy, the nature of government policy, the restrictions, the direct support from government to businesses, and consumer stimulus like Kon La Krung, which I think ends today. Local dining out culture was also an important factor, by which I mean the capacity of the domestic market to replace the lost tourists. Technological and entrepreneurial innovation, particularly the food delivery app-based services. Location was important, restaurant concentration clusters. So depending on the infrastructure, the supporting infrastructure, getting people to those restaurants, not just by car, but public transport. Labor force flexibility, also important, and supporting or linkage services, landlords, rents that restaurants had to pay, and food supply chains as well, and their ability to be flexible. But also, importantly, restaurant type. So what do I mean by restaurant type? We surveyed 5 types of restaurant. One was a traditional Chinese restaurant, medium size. All of these Chinese restaurants, because we focused on Yaowarat. Yaowarat, very important because it's a major tourist area, but at the same time, it has a very strong, long-standing local clientele in the Sino-Thai community there. So they are dependent to relative degrees on tourists. A second type of restaurant, the Suki restaurant. So we're talking about large size, mass dining, 200 covers, multiple sittings. Modern, new generation Chinese restaurant, the boutique restaurant, medium size, maybe 150 covers. Chinese snack restaurant, in our case, it was a startup, recent startup, very small size, 20 covers. And the seafood restaurants of Yaowarat, very well known, very famous, large size, mass dining, 300 covers, multiple sittings. All of these had very different experiences under lockdown. So we found that Establishments survived lockdown, reduced demand because of the flexible workforce. A lot of foreign labor was used in the restaurants. They returned, many of them, to Myanmar. The government also contributed mostly in reducing social security contributions by employers and employees. That helped quite a lot. Landlords were often flexible. They reduced or deferred rent for a month or two, sometimes by as much as 20%, but this was not uniform. It depended on the restaurant owner's relationship with the landlord. They might belong to the same family. Food delivery service, especially during lockdown. As you know, restaurants were allowed to have takeout and food delivery during that period only, but it only worked for certain types of restaurants. So suki, not so much. And so some restaurants opted to close down altogether for that 45-day period. Food delivery commission often made it unprofitable for restaurants to go into this area. It can be up to 30% from Grab, from Gojek, these Food Panda, etc. So also reliance on technology such as QR code menus and the delivery apps, in fact, differed little from before COVID. There was an increase in the use of these. So COVID didn't change that much. Of course, it changed the quantity of delivery though, but the high gross profit fees made restaurants reluctant to collaborate. Lineman, through its connection with Wong Nai, was the most commonly used food delivery application service, according to our survey. Government schemes to stimulate consumer spending in restaurants were welcomed and were relatively successful, according to our limited survey, but they were often offset by the regulations requiring social distancing, even between members of the same family or intimate circle when dining out, by the early closing times, and by the alcohol sales bans. However, these were often brief and they were later relaxed. So restaurants were affected in different ways depending on their type and their degree of integration into the tourist industry. So the traditional Chinese restaurant, they were heavily dependent on local clientele, on local domestic market, about 70%, 30% foreign tourists. So they weren't hit that hard. They weren't strongly affected by the alcohol sales ban either. The suki mass dining was mostly dependent on local clientele. It wasn't affected too much either by the alcohol sales ban. But the new generation, sort of young generation Chinese restaurant boutique, they were hit quite badly because they had cocktail bars. You know, young people like cocktail bars. And so the alcohol sales ban hit them. They had also relied a lot on foreign tourists, walk-in foreign tourists, 70%. So they had to adapt and encourage local demand for their product. The snack walk-in casual dining was heavily dependent on walk-in tourists, so it's quite badly affected by the restrictions on tourists coming into the country. The seafood mass dining, you can imagine, was most badly hit. They relied a lot on tourists from Hong Kong, from Taiwan, from mainland China. And with this closing off of tourists, they had to turn to local Thai customers. So originally, you know, it had been about 80% tourists. They were also affected by the alcohol ban because seafood is often consumed with alcohol. But the research also found that there was a reserve of Thai customers, particularly young customers, traditionally put off by the heavy numbers of tourists around Yaowarat who came in to replace that lost market. And the new clientele did not demand many or any change to menus. They were further encouraged by promotions. They tended to be young. Old people remained wary of COVID. They didn't go out much. But crucial to this new customer base was the MRT, was the opening of the Blue Line, which got customers into Yaowarat, because Yaowarat is often associated with congestion, traffic congestion, parking issues. The MRT was able to get customers in and may well have saved or contributed to saving the restaurant industry there, or played a big part in that. So I conclude, in conclusion, that the COVID-19 situation probably led to no long-term change, right, in the restaurant business. Things will return to the old normal for the restaurant business. In terms of government performance, it says after COVID-19, but we have not got through the crisis. So we can't actually judge government performance at this stage to any sort of full extent. We need a bit more time to get through the crisis, and then we can look back. But they certainly got some things right. However, pandemic science needs to be used to justify things like alcohol ban and the enforced early closing hours. But all governments face a great difficulty during this period, no matter what kind of government it was, no matter where, because we're dealing with a situation which is unprecedented. It's difficult to judge whether the restaurant industry will fully recover at this stage, because we haven't got back to the old normal. And I would like to conclude there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas Bruce, for such an educational presentation on the topic of the impact of COVID-19 on the Bangkok restaurants. And we have learned that during the period of lockdown, right, many restaurants were being shut down. So food delivery service became a new trend for this business industry, for restaurant industry to survive. Apart from tourism and restaurant industry, COVID-19 also impact agricultural sector of Thailand that employs around 1/3 of the labor force. So our next presenter, Dr. Shweta Sinha, she'll be looking at the agricultural sector of Thailand and India and highlights the impact on the COVID-19 on agricultural sector of Thailand and India and suggests some policy recommendations.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Anthony. His Excellency, Dr. Pramin Letsuridej. His Excellency, Dr. Pramin Letsuridej, distinguished guests and dear friends, I would like to talk about the impact of COVID-19 on the agriculture sector of India and Thailand. I would start with the key highlights about India and talk more about Thailand. If we look at the global perspective, we have been hearing about the contraction of economy worldwide. And the IMF predicts that with the exception of China, most key economy growth in 2021 will remain much below than their pre-pandemic levels. Talking about the linkages between COVID-19 and the agriculture, we could clearly see the impact of COVID in terms of leading to lockdowns, how the lockdown disrupted the supply chains and disrupted the social protection, which further led to increasing inequalities. And the disrupted supply chain, you can see the influence on the economic slowdown. So this disrupted supply chain has also had impact on the food prices, which further led to some kind of changes in the demand and production. You could also see shifting food patterns and environment because of the disruption in the supply chain, as well as the impact on the food prices. So we'll try to look at the overall scenario depending on the impacts and how this could actually lead to challenges related to food insecurity in the region. And what we see particularly in terms of food security, these are the 6 major parameters. Looking at the availability in terms of the impact because of the supply chain and the labor shortage, the excess in terms of high food prices, loss of jobs, utilization in terms of consumption, people shifting to less healthy diets, stability in terms of export restrictions and price volatility, and then agencies in terms of loss of jobs, inequality in access to ICT access, and most importantly, sustainability, because we could see that the increase of food losses and waste happened during the pandemic, with more increase in terms of packaging and plastic use. And at the same time, during the pandemic period, there was diversion, less interest on the climate change and the environmental issues. So we'll try to look at this through different examples. A very quick snapshot on India. India it consists of basically 86% marginalized farmers, the agriculture sector contributing to 16% of GDP. About 43% farmers are on leased lands. About 61% of labor force in the agriculture sector are women. And talking about the reverse migration that took place during this pandemic period, approximately 20 to 50 million migrants were returning from the cities and towns to the villages. During this pandemic period, India exported about 13.6 million metric tons of rice, which is about 44% increase on an year-on-year basis in 2020. And this was the first time when, in the last decade, Vietnam was buying Indian rice because of the tightening supplies in Asia. Looking at the stimulus packages provided and the subsidies by the government in India, there have been 8 schemes and programs which have been focusing on these particular 8 areas, basically to strengthen the infrastructure, logistics, capacity, and the finance. And these 3 government interventions reforms, which have been basically in the area of basically the Essential Commodity Act, that looked at deregulation of some essential commodities so that the private sector could focus more on the storage facilities. The Trade and Commerce Ordinance was the second reform, where farmers can now sell in and outside the APMC without market fee. And the third one was the national framework creating farmers' agreement and partnership between the farmers and the buyers, so that the farmers could get fair prices, better seeds, farm inputs, and also improve the participation of private sectors in the country. Coming to Thailand, we could see the impact on the GDP as most of the economies have been facing, but the agriculture sector growth declined by 5.7%. And we could also see impact on the private impact on the private consumption, the private investment, public consumption, public investment, the exports and the imports also declined during this period. Some key highlights about Thailand. Agriculture sector value chain in Thailand employs approximately 24% of the total workforce. And in year 2020, more than half of the agricultural households in the country were actually cultivating and producing ready-to-sell products. About 76% of Thai agriculture households rely on income from non-agricultural sectors, which were further impacted because of the economic slowdown, apart from the agricultural incomes. And a recent study indicated that farmers in the south of Thailand faced maximum decrease in agricultural income by around 40%. Talking about the rice market in Thailand, in 2020, Thailand exported about 5.7 million metric tons of rice, which was a decline of 31%, lowest in the last 20 years. And the major challenges identified were the high rice prices in Thailand as compared to the competitors, a shortage of good containers because of the slow purchasing power of the rice importing countries. And the third was basically the 2020 droughts and also the late rains in Thailand, which led to the reduction in productions, creating along with COVID-19, creating a double disaster kind of scenario, which actually impacted more than 6 million farmers in Thailand. So analyzing the rice market during COVID, what we saw was these are the 3 major exporting countries. Thailand definitely the price varies from these countries. India, Vietnam being more competitive in terms of the rice prices. But one of the major benefit which Thailand got during this period was when Vietnam and Thailand banned the exports because they were more concerned about the domestic supplies, and that was the reason there was a ban in exports, and global criticism and reports on rice spoiling and waste actually pushed Vietnam to further return, and the resumption of export took place. But this was a very short-term benefit which Thailand could see in terms of increasing its exports despite the high rice prices. And as soon as these competitors returned, we could see that there was a decrease in exports in Thailand. Apart from rice, other products like meat, egg, milk, and fisheries, where the prices have been declining in this period. Also, it was interesting to look at the dependency of these products in terms of the export dependency and the domestic consumption, which we could clearly see that the fruits and vegetables were more export dependent, about 83%, tapioca, rubber, rice, and that was the reason why we could see some kind of fluctuations in the price in terms of the increase and decrease. Quickly looking at the impact on the stakeholders of the agricultural value chain, starting from the input companies, the seed and the fertilizer providers, to the end where we have the consumers consuming the products. There was quite a variation in terms of impact on these stakeholders across the agricultural value chain, where, for example, we could see input companies like Syngenta could see a growth of 5%. The traders like, for example, Kaset Thai International Sugar Corporation had its operating cost declined by 29%, and the net profit further decreased. For example, the food companies, Minor Foods, which we talk about, the Pizza, Sizzlers, and Bonchon, they reported growth about 15% in the first quarter, and that was because of people having more delivery and other options. Apart from this, the retailers, we could see Central Food increasing by 4%, Macro by 9% in terms, because there was more of stockpiling taking place during that period. But the 7-Eleven could see a drop of about 4%. And finally, talking about the consumers in the urban and the rural area, we could see that over-purchasing created artificial food shortage in the market. Also, consumers preferring different diet plans and people queuing for free food. During this period, there were various measures and policies by the Ministry of Agriculture and Cooperatives. There were three main categories of beneficiaries: the informal off-farmer workers, where about 15 million recipients have received this assistance of about 230 billion baht, which is 1.4% of GDP. The farmers, as of November 2020, around a total cost of 114 billion baht, which is about 0.7% of GDP. And there were other social assistance beneficiaries for the younger generation and senior citizens. The major challenges identified here were the eligibility of these beneficiaries and also some vulnerable groups that have been missed out. And probably this could create more, the impact could persist in the absence of further targeted support. Quickly talking about the role of technology, the technology varies from different value chains. The type of technologies used by the input companies, type of technologies by the farmers, improving production and better income levels, and different types of technologies being used by traders and food companies were seen. Basically, this COVID-19 had become a major trigger point which forced producers, distributors, and consumers to look at technology-enabled alternatives. And there were already existing online platforms, digital payments, and a very good success story from India in terms of direct benefit transfers, where it is the citizen ID is linked with the telephone number, with the bank account, and the direct transfer can be done to the accounts. and the other digital advisory applications already existing. So when we look at in Thailand, particularly households which had higher burden debt were more impacted. And we see that about 54% of Thai farmer households are on debt settlements and debt restructuring, according to the BIC. Also, growth in these retailers dropped by 10 to 13%. Consumption behavior was impacted. There were layoffs in the markets. Food loss took place. Also, the domestic poultry market, accounting for 62% of the total production, that also declined. And we could see omni-channel retailing methods to address the customer needs in this period. Now, talking about the current 2021, BAC is forecasting about 2.7 growth in the farmer sector. And at the same time, we have the International Monetary Fund predicting 5.2% growth in the ASEAN region, including Thailand. And NESD forecasts Thai economic growth in this year would reach about 2.5 to 3.5%. So we are optimistic, looking for a better future. With this, I would like to conclude in terms of recommendations. The interesting thing would be to accelerate the use of digital technologies, which played a major role in the pandemic, enhancing efficient risk management systems, implementing robust direct benefit transfer, for example, the case we talk about Jam Trinity in India. And this pandemic could actually create opportunity to develop the agriculture sector. Interesting would be actually looking at focusing on the high quality and on-time delivery in terms of the exports in Thailand. And if we look, I think Thailand 4.0 already creates a platform for the agriculture sector in Thailand. The government has already identified food for the future and advanced agriculture biotechnology among the 12 key sectors in the Eastern Economic Corridor. And I think this could be a great platform and the right time to enhance the use of technology and smart farming to increase the potential of agriculture sector in Thailand. So with that, I would conclude. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shweta, for such an insightful presentation on the impact of COVID-19 on agricultural sector. And we can learn that COVID-19 actually also provides an opportunity for Thailand to accelerate the use of technology in order to develop the food industry into the next level. Apart from Thailand, India was also another country that was affected by COVID-19. Since the first case that was reported in January 2020. And in order to control the spread of pandemic, the implementation of lockdown also led to the widespread panic amongst migrants across Indian major cities. So our next presenter, Dr. Mohammad Fahim, he'll be examining the regional perspective of COVID-19 impact on internal migrants in India and how the government respond to this pandemic.
Thank you, Acha. First of all, very warm afternoon to one and all. Today, I am here to present on the COVID pandemic and its impact of internal migrant in India. So their regional perspective and response. I take this topic because it's very interesting, because during when India announced the lockdown, so only this section of the society has suffered a lot. Because I was here, so I can see from the media that how they suffered. Of course, it is a fact. So I just designed my topic in the first. We have to give some overview picture of some Indian COVID scenario of before you, and after that we will discuss about what is internal migrant and what is a important role to play in Indian system, and also how when the COVID come in and how is impact on their life, and also we will discuss about what is the response for either from the central government, either from the state government, because India is a federal country. So as we know that I would like to use the picture, the COVID arrived in India. The first case has been identified in 13 January. And the case was identified, the person is from the state of Kerala, and their traveling history is from the epicenter of the COVID in China, in Wuhan. And the first death happened on 12th March and in Karnataka state, and the history travel says that he is come from the Saudi Arabia. And as of now, the total number of confirmed cases is about 12 million, and that is 162. I would like to add, yesterday, it is the largest 81,000 case per day. It is since October 2020. So it's a very alarming sign for India to tackle a second wave already arrived in India. And at the same time, parallel, we have to have vaccination program is going on already. 60 million people already done in third phases. If you talk about the temporal and spatial scenario of the COVID-19, you will see that the red zones, particularly if you see the red zones, these are the area we are in migrant people coming, means from north and central, they have to go and work in these metropolis cities, just like Maharashtra, Gujarat, and Tamil Nadu. So these are the states are welcoming migrant people go from the northern and central part to this state. And so that is why a lot of the COVID cases is arrive in this. Even now is Maharashtra itself is the largest COVID, and yesterday it is about 25,000 cases coming in one day. It is a huge amount. So if you see the picture, you can see that the peak was in September 16, when in one day 94,000 cases took place, and after that slowed down. But recently, as I mentioned, about the 81,000 case is coming yesterday, is a report according to the government report. So the impact we can see, actually I taken this scenario when the lockdown was taken place between the April to May. I mean March 25 there, so April to May. So you can see India got a minus GDP. Apart from that, I would like to add that is the unemployment rate also come down in 23.5% during these two years as compared to the previous years. So this is the impact overall you can say in COVID. Of course, the COVID given a lot of how the situation in India in various economic activities. So come on the migrant. It is very important because people not realize. If you see the numbers, I taken this figure from the census of India 2011. But as of now, some figures say it is about 6 million and 600 million. And it is if you see the number, is the third largest country after the India, China, India, and itself. And is a more than, so it is the internal migrant, means they have to leave their origin places within the India. Okay. And out of them, interstate have a very significant, because particularly the poor states, their people go to forward states like Maharashtra and Tamil Nadu. It is about 60 million. So my study is basically based on these 60 million people when the lockdown was taken place. So what happened with them? So that is very important. And the key source states, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Andhra Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, mostly they are located in the central and eastern India. On the other hand, destination states. So destination state Delhi, because capital city of India, and Maharashtra, where is Mumbai is a financial city of India, and Gujarat, and these are considered the forward states. So they have in migration is taken place. So most of the migrant is involved in that. So as I want to say that you have to remember 60 million internal migrant workers are there. So how they affect after the lockdown was announced? So some significance role, because it is considered it is not called a invisible citizen of India. Invisible, no one take it. But this crisis make government have to think how significant these number is. And as far as interstate migration in the role of the GNP is concerned, is a 10%. So the on the 25th of March, India have to impose nationwide lockdown. That's just announced one day before. It is called public curfew. There is a lot of services has been all. So what happened means problem will be happen to the internal market, because most of them are a secular migrant as well as daily wage migrants. So if there is a no economic activities taking place, so of course they have a only option to go back. So there is a problem of the transportation. So that is why you can see the lot of people are assembled in the bus station, and very surprised that lot of people, those don't have money, because they already spend 2 and 3 days and spend money, and they don't know any opportunity. So they have to go by walk. There is a one case from Gujarat to Bihar. They have go for 1200 kilometer by walk. So many people have died in between. That is a one scenario coming. That is a real impact on the internal migrant workers. So if you see the migrants, so there's some figures coming out. As per government report, 10 million people have leave their place where they are working to back to their home. Either they have arranged by the government, either they have to go by walk. And in between, while they are returning their home, 900 death has taken place. And of course, they have got no money. So of course, they have no money, so no food. So someone is worried and nervous. So, and also they cannot follow the rules which is imposed by the government, social distancing rules. So that is a one challenge before the government. So response coming immediately after the announcement of lockdown. So response coming from the central government. So under the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana, means that Prime Minister Poor Wealth Scheme, they have to given the package to help these migrant people. Apart from that, various state and various relief camp has been established by the various states level. So they have to be do. So most of the train has been arranged through the Sarmic special, means the labors. So migrate have to take in place. And apart from that, Prime Minister have Government of India have to be create the Prime Minister Care Fund. So people have to be give them, I mean, all the citizen of India can be put, and then they have to allocate the 10,000 million for the migrant laborers to help. Apart from that, they have to be given some initiative for employment, those who return back to their native place, so how they can provide the job in their place. And apart from that, some state also response. In this way, Kerala model was very much appreciated, because they think that those who are worker in their state, they are a guest. So they have a full care of them. Apart from some state just arrange the bus for them. So some state have a different responsibility they have to take in to help these workers. There are some findings which I learned, and also they have lesson learned for the in the future. Due to the COVID-19, internal migrant workers, particularly in migrant states, have Kerala suffer. I mean, the most of the so because the distance is very far from where they come from, are 2,000 kilometers. I mean, if you talk about Uttar Pradesh in the north, in the central, and they are working in the Kerala, so about the 3,000 kilometers. It is a very suffer a lot because so they lost their job. And also in this problem, the lesson learned is that there is a no such authentic database they have. Either is the responsibility of destination cities, destination states, and they have no any because they are daily wages, so they don't have any benefit of the social welfare schemes they can. And implement of lockdown with the ground preparation, there are no much such ground preparation is taken place, they have to announce. And on the other hand, internal market continually they have to be neglected for the long time. This is a lesson learned that they should be take care of them, because they play an important role in the national growth. And there are some policies, recommendation and suggestion, institutional mechanism to coordinate between central minister, states. So in this way, they can be faced in the future if such kind of the scenario will be emerge. And on the other hand, the most important thing is that to create the database of the workers. And in this regards, various nodal department has been created under the Ministry of Employment in order to manage the problem of particularly interstate management. Last but not least, I think this is very, very now COVID crisis made the invisible to visible to the people. So it is a very important message. Indian government. So it is in the future they have to be. Of course, they have done very lot. And this year, I just want to conclude is that India has, because most of the people come from the rural to urban areas. So in the rural area, there is a government scheme are there. So Manrega means guarantee. So this year, the government of India, they realize those who come back, so they have to be expend their budget for this program. So this is a, of course, they have visibility, so they understand the value of this internal migration. So this is from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mohammed Fahim, for such an insightful presentation. And we have learned that the establishment of this migrant worker database and also essential help from the government can help to minimize the migration of the worker during the COVID-19 pandemic. It goes without saying that there's no country that has recovered from COVID-19 as successful as China. Despite being the first country to be hit by COVID-19, China has managed to control the pandemic rapidly and effectively. In recent years, live streaming industry has gained great popularity, and especially through the e-commerce platform during the COVID-19 that has received great opportunity for development. So our next presenter, Dr. Usani Lerdratananun, she'll be looking at the China live streaming industry, examine the history and the development of China internet that contributed to the emergence of live streaming technology.
Good afternoon, everyone. Let's start off with some latest update on what's going on in China. We all know that after the outbreak of COVID-19, China has imposed lockdown in Wuhan and other cities in Hubei. Level 1 response began, and aggressive steps were taken in every province in China. These strict measures worked well. Things were nearly back to normal. However, the virus made a comeback after a long rest. Sporadic outbreaks were starting to occur more frequently in almost every part of China. And just recently on Wednesday, new cases have been reported in Ruili, which is a gateway for China and Myanmar trades in Yunnan province. Even though the Chinese authorities has given approval for the general public use of its vaccine from Sinopharm, people are still warned to strictly follow personal protection measures. And as of yesterday, the total vaccinations were about 100 million. That covers only less than 10% of the population. And in mid-March, China has relaxed the entry restriction for passengers from many countries, including Thailand, if only they have obtained Chinese vaccines and the vaccination certificate. And last but not least, the WHO report on the origin of the COVID-19 virus was presented on Tuesday. It judged a lab leak hypothesis extremely unlikely. However, further investigation is needed in order to rule out that claim. And these are the numbers of total cases as of yesterday at 7 p.m. The implication of what led behind these numbers are attractive, and I'm going to talk about just one in this study. It has been 1 year, 1 month, 3 months and exact 3 days since the world has been exposed to the news of viral cases in Wuhan, in Hubei. While most businesses faced with economic slowdown and regression, live streaming industry, however, is flourishing. So what contributes to the popularity of the live streaming industry in China? The study examined the history and development of China's internet that contributed to the emergence of live streaming technology and the development of live streaming technology industry in China, and the changes the pandemic has made to the industry, especially in e-commerce and entertainment sections. China has officially been recognized as a country accessible to internet since 1994. And from that on, especially after 2005, China invested greatly on the construction and upgrade of the national backbone network and broadband networks to cater the needs of the new media that rely greatly on the use of digital technologies. It is generally accepted that China's live streaming culture began after the emergence of Web 2.0 and particularly the Wi-Fi video chat room service. When internet network was updated and internet speed got faster, people developed the new way of sending and obtaining information from real-time text broadcast to picture and text, and then to voice broadcast, and finally to live video broadcast. And it has become a new business in China and made great fortune for many businesses, ordinary people and celebrities alike. It is said that during 2015 to 2016, there were more than 200 live broadcasting websites and applications in China. And there are roughly about 4 categories of products and services rely greatly on live streaming technology, namely gaming, e-commerce, entertainment, and education. However, the biggest growth potential of live streaming lies in e-commerce. So a number of originally entertainment live streaming applications and websites have now incorporated e-commerce functionalities in their own websites. And live streaming has some qualities that benefit many businesses. For example, it is straightforward, highly targeted, and effective. And these are some of the phases of the live streaming service providers. So businesses that integrate live streaming into their operations can enjoy so much benefit and survive intense market competition in both normal times and amidst the pandemic. There are some changes occurs to live streaming industry that has brought about opportunities and posed challenges to the industry and every player in the industry as well. There are live streaming offers people opportunities to socialize with others, to maintain relationship, and to connect with others for specific purposes. For example, we are having a live symposium right now. Secondly, live streaming and entertainment and e-commerce is booming ever before, and it is going to be a long-term trend. Many entertainment companies captured this trend and launched the service of live streaming concerts and attracted large number of viewers. While live commerce, it's live streaming plus e-commerce became a major new marketing channels for many brands after the lockdowns. It is said that 50% of Chinese online shoppers have increased the frequency and the amount of shopping due to the COVID-19. And third, agriculture moves from offline to online. And they enjoy much of the benefit of live streaming platforms. Some of them turn themselves into an educator, trainers, and presenter of their homeland products. And there are initiatives like Farmer Assistant Project to boost the agricultural product sales, and farmers who once sold 90% of their products offline have now switched 90% to online. And there was an online fair that sold out a container full, weighed about more than 2,000 tons of durian, longans, and coconuts from Thailand within 13 minutes. Next is the new entertainers are rising and the old stars might be dim. The famous KOLs or the key opinion leaders can help brands boost the sales greatly. There are quite a few successful KOL in China. However, with the increasingly high hiring rate of these KOLs, many brands decided not to use them to boost sales, but instead they explored the other opportunities that live streaming gave them and started CEO live streaming market. And the results were very impressive. For example, China's leading electronic appliances brand, Gree, made a big sale of 3 million renminbi, Chinese renminbi within 3 hours. And supermarket Hema sold 6 million shrimps in 3 seconds. 3 seconds. And last but not least, live streaming industry expanded to foreign countries and made impressive achievement, as in the case of Thailand. But however, with China's e-commerce giants approaching Thai consumers, there haven't been a favorable environment for Thai entrepreneurs and small players. They still find themselves in dilemma, pushing sales against Chinese goods and Chinese firms through Chinese-owned platforms. So there are several things that, these are some KOLs. There are several things that the Thai government and potential companies in private sector can do or learn from China's experience. First, it is urgent for Thailand to create own online platforms in order to compete with other 2 giants and some other foreign players in this market. There are quite a few platforms in the market, Thai platform, for example, Advice, powered by JD Central, C8.com Central, HomePro. And of course, there are giants like Lazada and Shopee who account for about 46% of the market share and 54% of the market share in 2019, respectively. There are still rooms for the Thai players, but we have to be hurried before some other newcomers jumped into the market. And secondly, government and potential companies in private sector in Thailand should offer training in online technology, especially in live streaming tools to encourage more shops and brands and entrepreneurs to join this e-commerce market. This is something the Chinese companies are doing, so we definitely can do the same thing. And third, the Thai government should try to negotiate and realize agreements and mutual collaborations that will encourage Thai entrepreneurs to expand its market to China. And in the meantime, the Thai government should also consider applying protective measures to avoid the flood of foreign goods coming to Thailand, especially from China. And fourthly, the Thai government can draw important lessons from China, that is to bring local farmers into live commerce business. Although agricultural sector in Thailand accounts for only less than 10% of the GDP, but it involves about 50% of the total labor force in Thailand. Local farmers, they have not had adequate knowledge in marketing, especially in online e-commerce platform. So the Thai government should give them opportunities to do so and provide them some knowledge. Lastly, the management of organic agriculture is a trend in recent years and in Thailand as well. Most certified organic products are currently exported to Europe and to the US. Therefore, there are opportunities to expand the market to China as well. So the Thai government should encourage Thai farmers, SMEs and domestic e-commerce operators and startups, and to provide channels to do so. In conclusion, COVID-19 has brought about changes in many ways, both positively and negatively. And there are opportunities for more businesses and also challenges for some players. This new normal in the live streaming industry is going to be a long-term trend. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Usani, for your presentation on the topic of China live streaming industry. So it can be seen that this live streaming industry in China has become a new trend for many businesses to survive and connect with the Chinese consumer during the pandemic. So after we have listened from different perspectives from the case of Thailand, China, and India, now let's move to the international level from the macroeconomics perspective. For past decade, we can see that the two big superpowers, US and China, continue to expand their influence in a wide range of areas, even during the outbreak of COVID-19. So our last presenter, Dr. Ontisha Dongratana, she'll be presenting on her observation of the US-China power, how it plays in Vietnam and the Philippines.
Okay, good afternoon, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Today, my paper is titled COVID-19 and the US-China rivalry, preliminary observations in the cases of Vietnam and the Philippines. As you all know that in the current global affairs, we have the rivalry between the two big powers, that is the United States and China. And the competition covers a wide range of areas, include diplomacy, non-military domains, in trade, in economics, and up to military and maritime security. And in the Chinese power in Southeast Asia is making headway in infrastructure development, trade, investment, and which economic appeals of China are apparent among the Southeast Asian states. Additionally, in terms of the US have military superiority and alliance networks, and so it holds a stronghold in the armaments and alliances and maritime security in Southeast Asia. And the power dynamics also complicated with the issue of the South China Sea that we see in the region. Now, the coronavirus has dominated the issue in the global era since 2020. And with the virus outbreak, it actually intensified the rivalry between the US and China. Apart from that, it also opened new avenues for competition, and that include the field of information, the field of aids for elevating the COVID-19 crisis, as well as in the field of vaccine distribution and development. And so today I will briefly first talk about the positions of Vietnam and the Philippines before the pandemic, and then elaborate the continuity and changes in their position during the COVID-19 outbreak. And then I will mention the lesson learned from the two countries and their implications on the future outlook onto the region, as well as for Thailand. In the case of Vietnam, Vietnam is always considered as a balanced hedger between the two superpowers, in which it tried to have relations and deterrence with both of the powers. And for Vietnam, why it's considered as a balanced hedger is because it has historical animosity with both the US and China. At the same time, it has ideological differences with the US. And because of its geographical proximity to China, it also have a threat there, feel a threat there from China. And so while it pursue economic relations with China, it also pursue limited military relations with the US in protection of itself, but not too much, so not to upset the big neighbor. And also, like I said, in the issue of the South China Sea, Vietnam is also one of the claimant states, and we will talk about that further. Now, during the COVID-19 pandemic, Vietnam can be seen to have a continuity in the hedging strategy. However, you can also see signals from Vietnam to be moving against China and more towards the United States during this time as well. And in terms of the hedging strategy, you can see that there's aid exchanges with both the US and China during the outbreak. And at the same time, Vietnam, as the ASEAN chair in 2020, also pursued high-level meetings with both countries, although separately. However, you can see that there's skepticism in the part of Vietnam against Chinese management of the pandemic. You can see that Vietnam has imposed very quick restrictions against the travel from China, despite the statement from the WHO in statement against this ban. And also there were claims that there's a Vietnamese state-backed hacker group called the APT32 that tried to access the Chinese government information, especially at the epicenter of the outbreak in Wuhan. And so in the case of the vaccine, Vietnam also developed its own vaccine, tried to procure the Sputnik V vaccine from Russia and procure AstraZeneca from the COVAX initiative. On the other hand, Vietnam is actually the only country in Southeast Asia that so far has not tried to acquire the Chinese vaccine. And also another important issue that came during the COVID-19 pandemic is that there's the Many claim that China became more aggressive in the South China Sea, this, amid the distracted actors in the region because they had to handle the pandemic inside their country. And so with Chinese aggression in Vietnam, and we'll see in the Philippines, you see a strong protest against China's aggressiveness in this area as well. Now, moving on to the Philippines. The Philippines actually has a trend of swings between the US and China, right, in different periods. And in the period pre-COVID, before COVID-19, the administration of Duterte actually have clear leanings towards China and actually a breaking away from the United States. Examples can be seen that despite the Permanent Court of Arbitration Award for Philippines and restriction of Chinese claims in the South China Sea, Duterte actually played down this award. There's a muted 2016 arbitration award in the side of the Philippines. And also breaking away from the United States, Duterte has been in conflict with Obama, and then it did really recover well with Trump as well. And by the early of the 2020, you actually see the initiation of the termination of the visiting force agreement with the US. And there's also an idea to cancel the enhanced defense agreement as well as the mutual defense treaty in 1951 as well. And so you see a clear breaking away from the United States in the side of the Philippines before the COVID-19. However, during the COVID-19 outbreak, you can still see the continuity of the Philippines administration in terms of their preference for China. You can see that Duterte has publicly stated his support for China amidst criticism that the source of the virus is from China, or the criticisms against the Chinese management of the outbreak, and also the vaccine development. And for the Philippines, it received aid from both countries, the US and China, but also sent aid to China early on in the outbreak. Now, although you see the preference for China, the Philippines also show signs during this time of moving back to a more balanced hedging strategy between the two powers. Right? And this can be seen in the case of the vaccine. The Philippines did first, right? The first country that the Philippines approached for the vaccine is China. However, the Philippines also acquire vaccines from the COVAX facility, as well as with the US. It actually used the military relations with the US as a ship to try to acquire the vaccine. So it tried to explore as many options as possible to try to get the vaccine. And so the termination of the military relations actually been halted because of that. In addition, there's a delayed Chinese investments from in Philippines, and so it actually take the Philippines back from China. And also, like I said, like in Vietnam, you have the South China Sea dispute where China is becoming more aggressive in this area during this period. So for the first time during Duterte's administration, that Duterte actually in the United Nations General Assembly, that he reaffirmed the 2016 arbitral ruling that that gave Philippines the award and then restrict the Chinese claim in the South China Sea. Now, the lesson learned from the two countries that I've mentioned is that first, hedging strategy remain an important strategy in the case of Vietnam and the Philippines. And traditional and non-traditional threats posed during the virus outbreak actually wavered the country's positions between the two superpowers. But traditional security threats in the case of the South China Sea is what seemed to be more significant in the state's change in the display of position. Now, to conclude, I'll conclude with the future outlook for the region as well as policy recommendations for Thailand. First of all, in the case of Thailand, between the US-China rivalry, Thailand also employed hedging strategy between the two powers. Nevertheless, in my opinion, Thailand has been leaning more towards China, and also right in the region overall, because of the case of the South China Sea dispute that became actually erupted more in the past year. There will be heightened security tensions in the region, and it will be difficult to actually manage it because of the lack of clarity as well as divergence in the ASEAN group, the ASEAN member states. As you can see, with the more clement states like Vietnam and the Philippines leaning more towards US now, and you still see countries that lean more towards China. And so it can lead to a divergence within the members to settle this problem and diffuse the heightened security tension. In the Thai case, policy recommendation, Thailand should seek further avenues to procure vaccines. Like in the case of Philippines, try to explore as many options as possible. And this can possibly be done through more concerted regional cooperation, such as through ASEAN. And lastly, with the heightened security tensions in the region, Thailand should also present a stance of neutrality between the two rival countries. And that is my presentation today.
So thank you, Dr. Ornticha, for such an interesting presentation. So this COVID-19 pandemic has led to dramatic loss of human life worldwide and also brought upon many challenges to the public health and the overall economy of the country. And to combat this pandemic, many countries around the world has implemented strict public measures to restrict the movement and also community restriction and thereby contain infection. So from the above 6 presentation, we can reach the following conclusion. In the case of Thailand, the tourism industry, which is dominated by Chinese tourists and one of the primary drivers of Thailand economic growth, was highly affected by the spread of pandemic. And the absence of these Chinese tourists also provides an opportunity for Thai to recalibrate its tourism industry and diversify its market to the other country. And when we look at the attitudes of Thai towards the Chinese tourists, we can conclude that social cultural compatibility and resonances between Chinese and Thai people around in the sustained interaction are the key for positive attitude change. And when we look at the restaurant industry of Thailand, particularly in Yaowarat, also have managed to sustain their business during the COVID-19 pandemic by shifting from reliance of foreign tourists to the local Thai customer instead. And in addition, the subsidized promotions such as Kon La Krung, restriction on commission charged by the food delivery services, and improvement in public infrastructure, such as the opening of new MRT station, have all helped to increase the local demand for the restaurant in Yaowarat that would otherwise struggle to stay alive during the pandemic. When looking at the agriculture sector of Thailand, the COVID-19 has also accelerated the use of digital technology in the agriculture sector through online platform, digital payment, and also provides a great opportunity for Thailand to leverage on technology, innovation, and logistics to develop the food industry to the next level. In the case of India, establishment of migrant worker database and the resource center that can link the data with the government policy will help to provide essential aid for the migrant workers that is affected by COVID-19 and minimize the migration across the major cities of India during the COVID-19 pandemic. In the case of China, we have observed that live streaming industry has become a new trend for the brands and retailer to survive and connect with the consumer during the pandemic, which Thailand can draw on the experience of China live streaming industry, such as to create more Thailand-owned platform, to offer knowledge and training opportunities to the Thai entrepreneur and startup business. In the context of geopolitics, the COVID-19 outbreak has escalated the rivalry between the two major powers, namely the United States and China, and opened new areas for competition that includes assistance in controlling and mitigating the effects of COVID-19, as well as vaccine development and distributions. Countries in this region, particularly Vietnam and Philippines, have therefore the need to alter their position to maintain relationship with the two major powers. So in conclusion, our research symposium has shed light on the multidimensional effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, which is far more than simply a health crisis, but it's affecting societies and economy at their core that varies from country to country. While COVID-19 has brought about many changes and challenges to the world, it has also provided a stimulus for the world to develop and learn from one another and overcome this global challenge together. Thank you. Okay. So now we will open the floor for the Q&A sessions. Yes, does anyone have any questions from the floor or from the Zoom? No Q&A session. All right, so thank you so much for all the 6 presenters. Please give them a round of applause.
So thank you everyone for your participation and to our presenters and moderator. For the next part of our symposium, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker of the day, Dr. Pramin Lersuridej, who is a graduate of the Suongulap Vidyalai School and received his medical training at the Mahidol University and the Ramathibodi Hospital. And as some of you may already be aware, was also a former Deputy Prime Minister as well as former Minister of Energy of Thailand. And he is currently one of the founders of the Care Kit Clean Thai Group. And today we'll hear more from him about his views on Thailand in this day and age of COVID-19. So without further ado, please give a round of applause for Dr. Pramin for his keynote speech.
Good afternoon. Professor Dr. Chanvit Kasesil, Dr. Akrapong Kamkun, Dean of the Pridi Phnom International College. It's my great pleasure to be here. You know, I'm very awkward to be standing here because I'm the one who is not academic, but have to give the keynote speech right now. First of all, may I express my deep gratitude for inviting me for this valuable research symposium. That's quite important. But because I come from the one who used to be the part of the decision of the policy maker of the country, and we are the government that use information to make decision. This is quite useful session for us. And may I share the view from the point of policy maker. And then at the past, probably I have made some comment on this six research. It's quite interesting. First of all, I think that the COVID-19 actually is pandemic that can cause death. That can cause death. Fear of death with unknown nature that will, and with adoption, will create panic. And this panic will create crisis because of the shortage of, the preparation, the medical supply, medical care, even all the service create the panic of the people. And that will create something. Before this session, I talked with Professor Dr. Chanvit. He stressed on the word of overreact. That is, I would like to present that. Overreact can aggregate crisis, especially economically. That's the point that I want to share. Having to solve this problem, I think that to overcome the crisis, we have to reduce the unknown. We first start with unknown. So we have to reduce the cost, the crisis. We have to reduce the unknown. To reduce the cost, we will reduce or control damage accordingly. And it's come with the disease. So I think the biomedical unknown will be first top priority. Sorry about that, because your presentation is very, top field about this biomedical. But for Thammasat University, you have a faculty of medicine. I expected the potential of interdisciplinary of this college will integrate that part to be yours. Not only that, I think that the integration and collaboration with other institutes as well as some other government agency will be, and also international agent will be quite useful. Biomedical knowledge unknown will be top priority, as I mentioned, because of at first we know very few about the nature of the virus per se, how it's contagious. The term of morbidity, I mean that how many people get sick, how many people get contagious, it have to learn. And the other cause is mean that mortality is rate of death. At first, I think that we face the situation of so many people dead, and fear of death will create the chaos. And then this happened to know that what pattern the rate of different age group and different ethnics. And the factor at the time being, this mortality rate reduced a lot. Look at Thailand. I think it's low. The mortality rate low, and at this time, even take the record roughly from starting last year till now, it's just 0.3% death only. So if you understand this, and the people understand this, if you reduce the fear and come back to the normal life faster than happens right now. As well as the clinical knowledge, how to detect the case, how to diagnose, how to what kind of medicine to treat, and what kind of clinical measure will be important in the first place, even right now. Right now, this come to me 1 year. After that, is much more clear. So the rate of death is reduced a lot. We know the virulent, I mean how it's aggressive of the disease is changed because of all the most virulent had caused a lot of death, and it's also death with the death because of the virus will death. So the not so strong at the first will impact on the stronger, and that not just have infected but not dead. And that is the case that if you infect more than that, you can see that now, the rate of infected maybe can increase, but the death is reduced all over the world. Then I think the knowledge about how to treat, even, the consequence at first, we don't know how to treat when to treat even the kind of not only antivirus, but also steroid to reduce the damage of the lung or something. Right now, we know when we should treat steroid or something that reduce the morbidity rate also. But the most important is how to, for the society, or I think that vaccination is the hope, and now it's time. Now it's time to release all. Actually, the vaccination, if in normal time, should take 10 years or something like to release one vaccine. But this crisis is make us to be shorten all the process. It's like we go to the war and people have to create even the weapon World War II create a nuclear bomb, right? Because have to accelerate on that crisis. Here also we create a lot of knowledge to produce vaccine. So a lot of variety, at least for the category, has been found and produced and have different kind of characteristic has been used to different kind of people. So if the government limit to just some, I think that's the problem to the people as well. Luckily, this morning, I just saw the news that they released some around 5 or 6 brands had been authorized to be sold. The other that we don't miss is about the rapid test kit. Why? The rapid test kit, because we have to identify the case, the infected case. The rapid test is quite important. Otherwise, we can identify who is infected by the rapid case and low cost. I will point out this because we will come back to the normal very soon. So fortunately enough, Thai people, the world has tried to create this kind of rapid test and low cost. And I just learned from my colleague that Thailand also have produced one from the Chulalongkorn and Institute of PTT one in Rayong, and have been published the paper that is very reliable and low cost. But why the government not declare to us? I just doubt, or they just wait for selling for themselves. Not only so, if you overcome that kind of medical knowledge to reduce the cost, but then this already makes a lot of change. Some other unknowns also needed. I think the behavioral pattern related to disease pandemic, individually and socially positive or negative, I think they all have been described. The cultural different, ethnical different should be identified. I take example, why Thai people, infect less. I read one article of the Foreign Affairs journals, they describe that because the culture of Thai people is different. Other than, the climate is very warm, and then every Thai people take 2 times a bath, in the morning, and then before. You never take shoe in your house. That will the kind of behavior to reduce yourself, to reduce the effect. That we never know ourselves unless someone have point out to us. This is important that this seminar, this symposium is important because of you use 2 factors. The one is intervention. COVID is a great intervention that you accelerate something that already change faster. Secondly, you use comparative study between COVID and non-COVID and COVID, right? And then it's good that we use the international to compare each other so that we can learn from each other. So the behavior also need to learn what happened, the new normal that happened, the social distancing, then the new behavior also makes some difference. I think that you already make a comment on and research on that. Social distancing. Now everyone wear mask. It's reduced it's drastically about the infection of the urinary tract. Upper respiratory tract. Your hospital record, reduce a lot of cases. And look at the children. Actually, the small kids, they infect a lot of respiratory tract infection, but now it's reduced a lot. So this should be different and worth to learn that what happened, but some may be permanent, some may not. Some may permanent is we can convert to new behavior that is, we have to study what trend it is. we have already made a comment on the digital technology make a role. I think that thanks for Dr. Usani, right, to point out that use China as a case, but actually it's on the trend. But this accelerates us to understand better. And if you are wise enough, you can bring that kind of technology to help you. Unfortunately, I'm not sure that the one who take power here is understand what we are saying. The telecommunication that will, now we use the new behavior, the teleconference, that as we do today, the distance learning, e-commerce, telemedicine is take a lot of role. It's not just live, the streaming. It can use to replace anything right now. So it's quite important if one who understand this trend can create a lot of opportunity as well. The other that I said is not the identify the test kit. That's a part to identify the one who infect. Think about that. If you want to invite, to open the country for the traveler, for the first thing you have to know that we or them is free of infected. The quick rapid test kit is quite important. Think about that. Actually, right now the availability of the test, it takes you some around 1 hour and 20 minutes to understand. If you go to the airport, you just take a test and then you're just walking around, and when you check into, that exactly what you are infected or not. If you are infected, you will be rejected. And this will integrate with some kind of technology of telecom technology is there, is available there. And then if you integrate this with the test, the kind of new kind of testability, you will know that where to go. But this will trade off with the kind of privacy as well. So the testability of the people of mobility doesn't work well, even in Australia and some other country. If myself, I don't like anyone to test me where I go, right? So this also have a role, but you have to, think about the privacy of the person. Consumption behavior change is quite important. I think that Dr. Thomas has already pointed out that the restaurant have to change because the behavior of the people to consume food is different. Right now, you can stay home and use the the mobile to keep you have a good food, and that will the trend. I think it's already go this way. It never come back, but it cannot replace the really physical social contact. Think this trend I observe. Look at the before the COVID. The people come to mingling at the department store. I think 1/3, probably more than that. 1/3 of the revenue from the big department store or something come from the food and beverage, because people right now, everyone have individual, but they come to mingling, and the way to mingling is on the restaurant part. That's still the trend. It cannot be replaced. After this COVID, they will come back, and you may see that it's already come back. So there's two sides of this kind that can observe and part of the study of research. Traveling also. Traveling and transportation is quite important. Even you look at the e-market, the e-commerce, finally you have to deliver. How to deliver, is in a which way that have to use the kind of transportation that make it safe for infected also. So if I were the government, I want to observe this kind of change and predict and create intervention, good intervention economically, because of right now you do behavior change, and as the government you need the kind of create the kind of economy. The government intervention is also worth mention. The compensation subsidy to whom what what reason, how much and how long. I think the research field should identify. Traveling control, the rapid test, as I said, vaccine, passport, quarantine, how long, and it's also all the question, how to shorten it. Think about that. I think the first presenter already make comment that tourism is quite important for Thailand. It's more than 10% of GDP. And it's the multiplier effect is high also. But then, you know, how to make that kind of travel, the kind of intervention, that how to make the quarantine short. If you are traveler, will you be quarantined 14 days? Right now, even this morning, they still declare 10 days, right? It's quite difficult. So we have to invent some measure that shorten this kind of thing. Then the tourists will come back. Traceability and privacy already discussed. Appropriate technology to apply to appropriate technology to be applied to what purpose. I think that actually I want to mention some around technology with agriculture. I think now one of our presenters make a great present that it's already been done very well in India. Rapid assessment is also worth mention. Okay, so actually what I want to point out at the last part is in Thailand is already here, rapid test from one of the research. The second, the treatment, adequate medicine is already there. Now is the situation, the crisis is subside. Appropriate treatment protocol is already one of the things that someone missed. I think Dr. Yosathat, sorry, my colleague Dr. Yosawat Pomyen, one of the researchers who graduated here from SAI here from Thammasat, had pointed out that one of the Thai researchers did a good research on the bat, the kind of bat, and can create antibody to counter COVID. But why people don't know? He pointed out a couple of things that I never know that, because the government even know but don't want to some other know. Prevention, disease control, vaccination already discussed, and detection of social behavioral change is quite important. So, as the government will, other than learn how the change happened, they have to create the intervention, and now the intervention is how the people has a compliance, what the result, what is the outcome and economic impact. That first to learn, but it has to be timely as well. So, as conclusion of this, if I were the decision maker of the government, that they never allow me after 2006, I was banned, and I banned myself also. So the research, we don't want the problem description, but need the solution. Sooner the better, and it's the dynamic. It's change, month by month, day by day, and the vaccination is still important. Right now, we are still on the chaos compared to some other country. That's kind of challenge. I may recommend that the multidisciplinary research center, starting from here, Thammasat University, and maybe extend to some other institute, because the government, they never made. Will the policymaker utilize the up-to-date dynamic information and light policy? How well the policy have been communicated? Is the other, like how well the communicate to the people to have the compliance? Think about this. Government enjoy create fear, even right now. So now they're difficult to control back. I try to say that it's not like that. The death rate is reduced a lot 6 months ago, and we have a lot of recommendation to as a policy, but they pretend to not hear anything, unfortunately. So I just use this venue to talk with you. Finally, may I make some comments on this? I think that the vice Dr. Why Dean did great on summarize of that kind of key. The first thing, tourists, I think that Dr. Yi Lin point out one of the things that change. I think the trend of the people right now, we call it individual traveler. Individual traveler, the young generation is, especially the Chinese, growth very fast. Right now, individual traveler come up to be more than some around 75% from some research. And what they want to is experience. Because so you make that presentation that it's quite important to have a kind of new kind of experience. Experience is key of products of the new tourism. And regarding the lockdown I mentioned, right? The growth of the presentation of Dr. Thomas about the growth on 2019, rapid growth, it means that the demand of this kind of food, Thai food, is great opportunity, street food especially, because you have variety, and Thai had a lot of things like that. Integrate with the kind of agriculture. We just think of not agriculture per se, but create to be food, ready food to be sold, create a lot of value. Right now, there is a technology to frozen, retain the kind of agriculture product to have a longer shelf life. Let's say 2 years. Think about that. Some of fresh agriculture, rather than perishable in very soon, they can preserve to be 2 years, and that will create great opportunity with the Thai cook, and then you can create that. The agriculture product, like the Indian case, may I add some? The rice field, actually, it mainly not relate well with the COVID, but you're right that the COVID reduce transportation, it will reduce the kind of supply, and that's create some of the price. The factor, this is commodity, the rice field, on my experience, is come up with different region with face different thing, floods and droughts somewhere. It will create, you make that price high to some other country that not face that. Secondly, business, the country that try to bid, it's kind of bidding. Some year India win the bid. Some year the Thai is too arrogant, you lost the market to Vietnam or something like that. That's the main basic. But COVID made a little bit change of that. So to understand it, you have to understand the background environment as well. But that is good. You point out a lot of things. Good. For interesting presentation of Dr. Mohammed, but that in migration, in internal migration, it's quite interesting, and I learned a lot from that, and deep impact on the Indian case. But that, I learned from China. China has a good measure to control the people with the work. They use the, let's say, the right to be, housing. They use the housing strategy. You can have this house if you graduate this and that. In some period, you don't need. You will just make it difficult to move in. So you control the migration. But in Indian case, it's specific. No one can easily solve that. Streaming, I think that's already mentioned. Surprisingly, that durian 200 tons in 13 minutes. So I will sell to you. By the way, the last one regarding Dr. or teacher need to put, try to understand. But the factor of this kind of conflict is stay long time. COVID just come to different, like actually it's vaccine diplomacy. Not only in Asia region, in US and Europe fighting, right? Because of some from German, Pfizer from German, there has some politics. Indian has a case, Indian try to sell vaccine to us as well, to Thailand as well, because they produce a lot of good vaccine. So this is the rival of China and US, it stay long and will long because it's try to replace who will be the top one. But COVID will be one of the let's say dimension. So that's what I would like to comment at final as a, not an academician. I pretend to be academician that I cannot do well, but thanks a lot for this session to give me a lot of insights and to understand better. Okay, thank you very much.